What's up, guys? Braden from Red's Cold Blooded Critters, and welcome back to episode 4. In that last episode, you would have seen me put together this enclosure here for my central rough knobtail geckos. As I said in the last episode, we didn't go into too much detail. I was extremely sick, but I'm back to what I would say somewhat full health, and I'm ready to just get stuck back into it and keep getting these enclosures knocked over so we can put some more of these animals, get them out of the tubs and put them into the enclosures. So in this episode, we'll cover just finishing this banded Asper enclosure. There's already a background in there. I pre-bought it a few years ago. You would have seen me sort of shape it up in that previous episode, getting it nice and square so that we can put it in this enclosure and no insects or geckos or anything like that can get behind it. So we're going to do some bedding for these guys, and then we've got to do just some hardscape and put some stuff in there and make it look real pretty. The next step after that will be we'll jump straight into doing the Wheelery's enclosure. Again, we'll jump over onto Iron Naturalists for both these enclosures. Just have a look at basically the kind of environment you might expect to find these guys, and then we'll get some photos for motivation and we'll just get stuck straight into it. So there's a little bit to cover in this episode. We'll go into a lot more detail, but for now, I think I'll finish my coffee. I've got to feed some of these geckos, some of the dragons and the monitor here, and then it's straight into it. So stick around for that, and yeah, hopefully this episode will be a little bit more informative and you guys will get a better idea of how you can set up these backgrounds. So stick around for that. Okay guys, we're back onto Iron Naturalists. You guys would have seen if you watched the previous episode how I used this to get a better understanding of sort of roughly where these guys are from in Australia, being the banded Asper, or the eastern spiny knobtail gecko, whatever you want to call it. There's a few different names for it. I personally just refer to it as the banded Asper, but it's up to you guys. So again, like I said, if you watched the previous episode, you would have seen how we use it. It's just as simple as, now if you type in banded Asper in the search bar here, it won't come up, even though it's one of its sort of common names. You have to refer to it as the its Latin name, or it's eastern spiny knobtail gecko. It's up to you. And boom. Alright, so just like in the previous episode, you'll see obviously there's a number of photos here that have been taken by people and uploaded on here, giving you guys a better understanding of where these guys might be located in Australia, and just the kind of environment that they come from. So the thing with these guys is they cover a lot larger area than the central rough knobtail gecko, like these guys' cousin, or the Emye gecko, like you would have seen in the last episode. So he's quite a nice individual that really displays its night colours, the real nice banding, the white and brown banding and so forth. But just from this you can see it's the ground mixture and that sort of stuff here is very a cross between sort of a desert sand, dirt, lots of leaf mixture, little tufts of grass and so forth. So, and we jump onto the map here, we can actually see, just zooming out slightly, all the little red dots again where these guys are covered. So they cover a lot of the Great Dividing Range up here in Queensland, right the way across central Queensland, all the way through to sort of almost western Queensland really. There's no doubt, given that these guys have been photographed and discovered in these areas here, they would cover, a lot of these centralized areas and so forth. So just using that information, you can see they've covered such a large area. You're going to come across a number of different environments that you're going to find these guys. And whilst that might make it hard for you guys to sort of create or design an enclosure, you don't obviously have something specific to look at or a specific area to sort of really focus on. You can be really creative with it. So again, here's some nice photos just displaying what these guys look like when it loads. So again, real nice sort of white underside, brown and white banding on the top, and nice sort of facial features. And some of these individuals have really nice eyes, almost like a purpley sort of color, and they're quite a unique gecko, and I happen to quite like them. So you can see just from this photo here, this has obviously been one that's been found directly out in the bush, that upturned log and so forth. And he's showing off his defensive display here, so they sort of pop their eyes out of their head, make themselves stand up and look as tall as possible. But this is a real sort of you don't see much red here in the sand or anything like that. It's just a real sort of dirty Aussie bush kind of bushland sort of environment there. So you can be real creative with it. I think given the background that I've already got in the enclosure, we're going to stick with a bit more of an Aussie typical, Queensland sort of bushland. We'll have some rocks and the dried grass and so forth. This is quite a nice picture here. And just looking at these rocks here, you can see they're sort of a yellowy black sort of tinge with lots of dry grass and there's a few gum tree leaves and so forth. So I think what we'll do is we'll use this photo as our generalized sort of motivation, and we'll get stuck into what I'll do is I'll make up some bedding for these guys, and then we might try and source out some rocks, or we might try and make some rocks just with that foam, and we'll get to making this enclosure. So just again, like I said, using this program just to help you find that motivation and help you design your enclosures. You can see I opened up this tab before just doing a little bit of research there, and you can see just the vast area that these guys cover. So you can, all the way from sort of rainforesty tropical areas right the way down to open grassland and quite deserty areas. And so get creative with it and stick around, and I'll show you how I design these guys' enclosures. Alright, so we've got a few things set up ready to go for the enclosure. We've got some of the PVC hides that I'd cut in half previously in I think it was the last episode. What I've done, I'd put a layer of tile pointing on over the top. However, the colour that I did the tile pointing over the top was a lot more of a red colour, similar to sort of what we've got in the MA enclosure. So it didn't quite suit what was going to go into here. So all I've done was just painted a real light layer of glue over the top, and then sprinkled some of the substrate that I'm going to be putting into this enclosure onto that, and it sort of contrasts quite well with the rock. It doesn't look too out of place. It's not red, it's not anything like that. So these can go in, and I'll get stuck into it. We'll throw some substrate in, throw some wood in, and I've just put a vertical bit of wood here to sort of simulate like a branch coming up out of the ground. It's just screwed to the roof here just to stop it from falling over. It keeps it nice and stable, rather than me sort of gluing it or hot glue gunning it to the bottom of the enclosure. It's best I can just take that straight off and move it on. It's no big deal. So I guess I'll just get stuck straight into it. There's not much to talk about with it except just getting cracking on with it. So I'll put it on a time lapse from here, and once it's done we'll have a quick talk about it, and we'll go from there. Righto guys, that's all done. As good as I think I can make it look, as sort of natural bushy sort of theme. I think for now that'll do. There's a few things I think I might like to change in the future. I think I might put like a nice sort of a log or something along the front there, and the grasses and stuff growing out from around it. But just throwing some leaves in amongst here. I've put the hides and hidden them in there. So this substrate's just a mixture of red desert sand, Sydney wash play sand, and some peat moss. So just equal amounts of just mixing that right up. And this is a sort of substrate that comes with it. It's a real sort of natural looking sort of dirt, and then I've obviously, as you would have seen in the time lapse, there's some dried gum tree leaves and that I've had from the garden. So the sand is a little bit clumped up at the moment. It's still a tiny bit moist, but it'll dry out quite quickly. The heat mat's on, lights are on, that sort of stuff, so it won't take long once this enclosure's all closed up to sort of slowly dry out. Please excuse our noisy birds, but anyway, like I said, it won't take long for this sort of stuff to dry out. The geckos can't get behind the rock wall, neither can the woodies or the crickets or anything like that, so I'm pretty stoked. So as I would have said to you guys, I'm planning on putting on a pair or even hopefully a trio of banded aspers or aspers, whatever you want to call them, into this enclosure here. But for the interim, until I can get my hands on some of them, I do have an adult pair of thick-tailed geckos, and I think they'll like it in here for the time being. So just until I can get my hands on some of them, I'll put some thick-tails in here, and I think it'll look quite nice and give them something to rummage and roam around and all that sort of stuff and hunt through and whatnot, considering they've been up in the tubs there. So this will be something nice and different for them. So I'll show you what I've got, and then we'll throw them straight in. Alright, these guys are very fidgety, do not sit still, very bitey, so I won't keep them long, but that's my female. She's quite a nice yellowy golden colour, real nice face on her, and then there's the male. He's quite dark, so I would hold them out a bit longer, but they really just don't like being held. But a bit like the other video, I'll throw them in there, and we'll try and get some nice footage of them in sort of a naturalistic kind of looking environment, and see how they like it. But so far, I think they look great in there. Alright. Well, I'll get some close-up footage of that for you guys, and then we're not going to muck around. We'll get stuck straight into the wheelery enclosure. We've got to do up a big custom background for that, so that's going to take some time, and we're going to go into a lot more detail on how I actually build them backgrounds and tile pointing, the mixtures, adding the dye and the colours and so forth. So, well, first things first, I think we'll get back over to iNaturalist again, get an idea of what we're working with and the kind of area and the type of environment that I'd like to mimic, and then we'll just get stuck straight into it, so you don't muck around too long. For now, I'll get some cool footage of these guys just doing their thing and walking around being a gecko, and yeah, we'll get stuck into it. So stick around for that. Alright guys, heading back over to iNaturalist, we will have a look at some wheelery photos and just kind of get an idea of the kind of environment that we're going to imitate for these guys. So there is two different types of, well, they're all still a wheelery, it's just two different localities. You have your northern banded knobtail geckos, which is the Nephrus cinctus, and then you have the banded knobtail gecko, which is the Nephrus wheeleri. They all just sort of are still known as a wheelery. It's just depending on whether they're northern or whether or not they're that's the southern species. So generally speaking, the cinctus is quite a pale, a bit of a dull pink in the blacks, whereas your southern ones, the wheeleries, they're a lot more red, deeper with the reds and the blacks, and they're quite a slightly different patterning to them. But I've got cinctus, so let's imitate some environments that they'll be from. So these guys are, like I said, the northern banded species, and there is quite a variation in amongst these guys on these photos. So there's quite a few pale ones, and then there's a few decent sort of colors there, but generally speaking, this is the kind of thing that you would expect when looking at a sort of a cinctus in terms of its color, the bands, the thick black banding, and the little neck collar that they've got going on. And yeah, so just looking at these photos, you can see obviously they come from the very red, rich, rocky area. If we look at sort of where some of these photos were taken, you can sort of see, looking at this one here, if we go into more observations, one sec, we can see whereabouts in Western Australia it was taken. So if we just zoom out a little bit, yeah, so it's right up the sort of the top. You can see the sort of, or right up the northwestern side of WA, and the border for Northern Territory is just sort of along the right of the screen here. So given that, we can look up kind of the areas in which you would expect to find them. There's the Hamersley Ranges of the northwestern WA, and Broom's up in this area somewhere. And yeah, what we'll do is just using this here, you can see some of the other observations and where they've been photographed and observed, and just looking at some of the pictures, you can see it all sort of, they all come from quite a rich, reddy and very rocky environment. So like this one, for example, say Comes from the Katanjini National Park in Western Australia. So very rich red rock area, and if we just follow that sort of principle, we can see, looking at some of the photos, the kind of rock formations that we might expect, or you might expect to see them in. So obviously, again, a bit like the Amia geckos, you're not going to quite find them inside the water, obviously, but if we look at some of these rock formations and stuff, you can get a pretty good idea of just the colors, and it looks like basically a lot of tiles that have just been stacked on top of each other with different varying sort of depths and that sort of stuff. So obviously, again, you won't find them right down on the water, but you will find them up in sort of these areas up and along the rock formations and that sort of stuff. So I'm thinking, given these photos and just a few of them observations and how rich in the red, I think we'll obviously follow that same theme as the Amias and continue on with the real sort of rich red, purpley sort of rock. And I think the background here will add some varying depths and rock formations and that sort of stuff, and we'll get some decent sort of purpley red coloration to it. And we might throw some grasses and stuff in there and add a bit of greenery and whatnot. And I think that'll contrast quite well. Trying to mimic maybe something like this kind of environment. With this photo here, we can see, excuse me, I don't know if it's gonna, there we go. We can see the contrasting, and I think the green sits really well amongst this real rich red purpley kind of rock. So I think with that, we'll follow something like that, and we'll get stuck into it. Less talking about it and more just getting cracking on. Okay guys, before we get started on the backgrounds there, I'll just show you some of the tools that I use to help shape that polystyrene once you've got it into place, and once you've cut out the big shapes and roughly have a pretty good idea of what it is that you actually want. So first off, a nice cheaper option if you are on a bit of a budget, or you're only doing 1 or 2 enclosures and you don't think you're going to be doing it long term. It's just this little cheap, you can buy this from eBay. It doesn't even really have a brand. Basically turn it on, heats up the wire, sends a sort of a current through it, heats right up, and you can form that polystyrene. Cool thing about this one is it has interchangeable heads, so you can use that head that you just saw there for the bigger picture and to sort of really carve down your rocks. The second option is this, it's just like a pencil tip sort of looking option, and this one here is quite handy for forming out some cracks and that sort of stuff. So quite a useful tool, and it does help you really get in there and sort of create them crevices and so forth, and add a little bit of extra sort of details that you just can't with this tool here. So the other option that you've got, in my opinion, works a lot better if you're using bigger surfaces and bigger rocks, and you're trying to cover a bigger area, which is probably what I'll be using on these enclosures behind me when I do the backgrounds for that, is this Proxon thermo cutting tool. Basically you plug it in, it's got a trigger, you control how hot it is. The cool thing about this one is, guys, it comes with multiple wires, but you can bend this wire and create some sort of unique shapes and that sort of stuff. Move the arms, if you want sort of real sharp cracks in the rocks there, you can sort of make them sort of sharper cracks if you want to cover a bigger area and just have some sort of minute sort of details, but just enough that looks natural. Turn it on, run it through your polystyrene, and you can cut it and carve it right up. So very handy tool. I did some big 8-foot enclosures with this one, and it cut down the time of doing them enclosures tremendously just by using this tool. So every couple burns through the polystyrene, switch it up, bend it up a little bit, change it, so it doesn't all look the same all the way through. I unfortunately made that mistake with the last ones that I didn't quite change it up as much, and it was very repetitive, but you live and you learn. Very handy tool. It is a bit bigger. It comes with a bigger sort of heavier box that it sort of connects up to, and you plug it in and so forth. So it's not quite as versatile as the other tool, but this one, it does look, they're both good in their own way. It's up to you and how much you want to spend. This was $12, $17 delivered or something from eBay. This one was $175, and I'm fairly certain it come from Turkey. So it depends how much you're going to spend. This, I think, like I said, it was about $175, give or take. But definitely worth it, and I would spend it time and time again. The only thing you need to do is, it does come with spare wires, but you should get some more because they do burn out eventually, and they, after bending them a bit, you know, they get weak and then they sort of break. So this is my last wire. I don't know where my other wires are gone, but this one should last. I'll look after it. If not, I'm sure I can find something there. But anyway, like I said, so you're just covering big rocks and big areas. You can add a little bit more detail and then finish it off with your smaller tools and add some cracks and crevices into your polystyrene and that. So using these tools here, probably the cheaper option of the two. We'll get started on this background. I've already cut a bit of polystyrene as the back sort of plate, our template sort of go in there, and now I'll go and grab some polystyrene and we'll start cutting it up and shaping it up and trying to make something out of it, and yeah, see what we can do, see if we can make something nice and unique. We do want to, one thing I want to do, just like the MEA's enclosures, I do want to incorporate a lay tub into the background, so something with the rocks and so forth, and with a lid that just they can sort of take on and off, and I can have a look and, you know, keep the sand and substrate and stuff in there nice and moist. One, that helps them to shed. They will go into them areas to help peel that skin off and whatnot, and secondly, because I do breed these guys, there's somewhere for them to lay their eggs. So the rest of the enclosure will be quite dry. I need that one to be a little bit more moist for them, and yeah, it'll add that, just that little bit of enrichment. So we'll get stuck into that. We'll go out there and start cutting some polystyrene. I don't really have to show you guys how to do that. It's pretty straightforward. Just with like an old bit here, you have your polystyrene, hold the trigger down, run it through, and it just melts away at it and cuts it. So I need to go and cut some shapes and some shelves, and yeah, we'll get cracking on that. So I've got my background to a point where I think I'm quite happy with the shape and the texture, the ledges and all that sort of stuff. So what I want to show you guys quickly is how this tool works, and once you guys might already have an idea, I'll just sort of show you how I use it and how we can make these look, this like sort of background, make it look a little bit more natural. Sorry, before we start the tile pointing and that sort of stuff. So I've got the two different tool tips. Obviously got the pen sort of tip, I like to call it, and then we've just got the wire one. So these rock formations and so forth up there in the Pilbara region and up in northwestern WA is kind of, they're quite stacked. It's like you've seen from the photos there, it seems like there's a lot stacked on top of each other. There's a lot of different shapes in and out and so forth. However, they're not all exactly square like this. So whilst they do, and whilst the rocks and the formations and stuff are quite sharp, they're not exactly rounded, like smooth rounded boulders. They're not exactly sharp like this. So what we need to do, and what we can do, just to take a bit of that edge off and just have it looking a little bit more natural, you can see just by cutting it out, we've already sort of got them nice formations that come out horizontally to us and sort of vertically, sort of they look all right, but we just want to take the edge off. So just with our tool, just putting it on a slight angle, you can take little bits of angle off like that. So I don't know if you can see that, but I'll change it up a little bit there, but just taking the tip off. And just by turning the tool itself, what you essentially do is you create depth in that rock, and you know, you can make it look forward, like, you know, put it forward and tilt it back and that sort of stuff, and you just take that edge off. And every now and again, if you see a point that's a little bit too sharp, just go over it. I always like to say, and it's a pretty standard principle, and I'm sure everyone else that is building their rock backgrounds and so forth would already know this, but you can always take more off, but you can't put it back on. So each time you do it, just start with little bits at a time. If you're happy with it and it looks good, or you think it needs more, take a little bit more off. But for the interim and just for now, just do little bits at a time, all right? Because once you do it and it's done and it's glued in like it is for me, you can't go back on it. So I'll throw the rest of this video on a time lapse, and I'll show you how I form up sort of the rest of this enclosure. My idea is I'm just going to take a bit of the edge off some of these rocks, and I might throw a nice big crack straight down the guts here. Sorry, just using this tool, and yeah, we'll try and add some depth into some of these cracks and so forth, and yeah, we'll go from there. I'm just going to turn that fan on up there behind me because the fumes are, you're cutting through, polystyrene type plastic with hot wire, so it's a little bit fumy, but we'll get through it. So stick around and see the end result there. Alright guys, that background is finished. Excuse me, I do have some explaining to do. I did say to you guys that I was going to show you guys how I did the tile pointing and how I mixed it up and how I got it prepared and so forth, etc. And how I did there's few other little things and stuff that you can do to make it look more natural. Two things, I have to do a lot of this tile pointing and painting outside of the house at my place in the backyard. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of birds and they're extremely noisy, so they do make it hard when it comes time to actually doing videos because they're very talkative, and if I'm not showing them attention and I'm showing something else attention, they will let you know about it. So the other thing is it's extremely difficult to get the lighting right out there and the angles and stuff, so it's really hard to show you guys how I get stuck into it and the little things that I do. But what I am going to do is I do have to make a bit like there's a few little of them rock stacks, the artificial rock stacks that I made for the Emiers. I'm going to make a few more of them for these guys, and because they're a lot smaller, I'll set up a little area inside the room here and I'll show you guys how I do that, and basically the same principle that you would have for that, So I think, in my opinion, this is probably the best enclosure I've done to date. There's lots of little cracks and so forth in there. It's a nice rich red colour, similar to that in the photos, and it's got a little bit of black shading and speckling through it and that sort of stuff. There's a nice little nest box here with a lid that comes on and off that I can take in and out and look for eggs and so forth, as I've got 2 females here that breed and they lay between 2 to 3 clutches a year. So it's a decent little high box, and it's hidden in there, and I think it looks quite good. It sort of doesn't stand out too much. There's probably a little bit more detail I could do on this rock here to sort of match the vibe that we've got going on, but you live and you learn, and at the end of the day, once we pack a heap of sand and substrate and stuff in there, you're not going to notice the minute little details that I think I could have done better. But for somebody who doesn't build backgrounds or doesn't keep reptiles, I think you guys think it'll look fine. So what I'll do is I'm going to set the rest of this closure up as best I can, and then we'll get stuck into doing them rock stacks, and I'll put the rock stacks in and we'll throw the animals in and we'll get cracking onto the next enclosure. So before I go further, you've probably seen some little Red's Cold-Blooded Critters shirt, so big thanks to my sister-in-law's mother. She has a shirt printing gig thing that she's got going on, so she's made up a few shirts for me, and you'll probably see a lot more of these shirts and stuff in my videos. So I'm pretty stoked about that, and I do have a coffee cup with the same thing, and I'd like to get a jumper and maybe a hat made up one day, but for now I've got some shirts, so I'm pretty stoked with that. Yeah, let's get into making up some bedding for these guys, adding a bit more stuff here and there and making it look a little bit more natural, so stick around for that. Okay guys, so like I said to you just in that last clip, I was going to show you how I make some of these rock stacks. So I didn't want to pre-make them and then explain it. I just wanted to show you pretty much step by step how I do it, but I'll try and do it sort of as quick as possible. Basically, I've still got a lot of cutouts, leftover bits here, of all different sort of shapes, thicknesses, sizes, etc. There's a lot here that I can work with. So just given that, what I do basically is, you don't need to cut it, you don't need to use your hot wire brush, you don't need anything like that. Just simply break it apart. Doesn't need to be perfect. If it looks a bit too square or unnatural, change it. Just keep breaking it up. So go through, break up a stack of this. Right, that's quite literally all I would do. There's not much else I can sort of say to you. That's it. There's no secret to it. Just get creative with it, break it up. Now you've got a few pieces. Right, it doesn't matter if you've got lines and stuff on them, whatever, anyway, you're going to have painting over it. If you've got smooth finishes like this, you can break it apart. So if you want that bit more of a jagged look, whatever. I personally prefer a little bit more of a jagged look, but it's entirely up to you guys, whatever. The second thing I use, obviously I've got some toothpicks here. This just helps keep it sort of stacked together whilst you're stacking it. And then just the PVA wool glue. We used this in a few videos ago there to put it over the top and then sprinkle that sand and that sort of stuff. This is the only glue that I've got at the moment. You can use whatever glue that you want. It doesn't matter, right? This is just what I've got. It works well, and these guys stick together, so that's all that matters. Grab a few of your pieces, stick them together. Once you're happy with roughly the shape, you know, you can offset them a little bit if you want to offset them a little bit just to add that thing, but keep in mind you've got to try and paint down into that. So be as creative as you want with it, but as long as you can get that tile pointing and a brush and that sort of stuff down into there, sweet. So that alone, just looking like that, I think it looks pretty good. All you can do now is you can either stick your toothpick in straight from the top, push it right the way down and in there. Preferably find like a pencil or something, because if you're anything like me, you'll just continue to stab yourself, and that holds that together. So voila. If you're really happy with how that looks, then I mean, once the toothpick's in, you can sort of chop and change it up a bit and change angles and whatnot. So that's sweet. I think I'm pretty happy with that. So what I'll do is I'll just stick this on top of this whilst I'm gluing, just so that I don't get any glue on the carpet. Lay your pieces out how you want them. Dab of glue in between each thing. Get to stacking. Bit of glue. Stack. Glue. Stack. And glue. Maybe put this one over here. Stack. Drop it down. Toothpick again. Right the way through. So if you find that the toothpick doesn't go all the way through, you know, depending on how big your rock stacks are, just put a couple in there. Go from the bottom up, go from the top down, and as you can see, I can hold on to one piece now. And that's a rock stack that's done. So I'll make a few more of these and I'll whack it on a time lapse. I'll make a few more of them and then we'll get to tile pointing. So we'll watch how we get that done. Alright, so as you would have seen from previous clips, we've got some of our stacks made up. They're glued together. They're not coming apart. That's the main thing. I'll show you guys how we paint up these and make them sort of look as natural as possible. I'll just put the first coat on and then I'll probably show you the last coat, because otherwise this video will just blow right out if I have to show you each and every layer. So layers like this, with reptiles like geckos and that sort of stuff, you only have to put on a few layers. You don't necessarily have to put on, you know, 4 or 5 layers. I would recommend putting on lots of layers of the tile pointing if you're going to put these in with, say, like monitors or perhaps even blue tongues, something with a little bit more strength, and especially monitors with their claws and that sort of stuff, they can sort of chip away at it quite easily. So the more the better for them, but with your geckos, they're not going to be an issue. So first and foremost, you need your tile pointing. Right, this stuff you can get for Bunnings. I think it's like $40 a tub. It's not that bad. So make sure you get the sand color. It comes in, I think, 3 different types of colors. You have this one, and then there's a gray, and I believe there's a black, but don't hold me to it. I always go with the sand because it's a bit more of a natural sort of color, and it's easier to, when you throw your dyes in, which is just some of this color oxide. There's multiple different colors. Go to town with it. I've just got the sandstone color and the brick red color, so that adds a real nice red finish. And this is the dye that we mixed in to get that color up in that background. So go to town with it. Put as much dye in as you want, but I'll show you how I do it, and then you guys can, if you choose to make your own backgrounds, can follow. So just getting a good sort of scoop of it and not getting any of it on the carpet. We're only covering four things here. So We only need a few scoops of it. With your first couple layers, you always want to start, in my opinion, a bit wetter. So you want to really sort of water it down. There's probably 3 good scoops that'll do. And if you have some left over, that's okay. Chuck a lid on it. Don't let too much air get to it, and it'll stay moist for longer, so it won't dry out as quick. Right, that's your first part. Second part, add your water. Depending on how watery you want it, it already comes at quite a nice sort of pasty level, but this is at this consistency, it's quite hard to brush it on. Just squirt in. That helps a bit of pressure to the water. Just squirt in a bit of water. This stuff, whilst it might come across really wet and like really sort of liquidy, and you might sort of be a bit worried, the water does evaporate out of it really quickly, so don't freak out. And you can pour it out if it pulls up too much. So mix that right up. You just want to get as much of that water in amongst that paste as possible, amongst that pointing. Once you're sort of at a point where you think, oh, I'm happy with it, you don't have to go like mixing it up too heavy just now, because we're going to add our color oxide anyway, so you're going to end up having to mix it. So this color oxide is very strong color. It will make this stuff go super red, so you really don't need too much of it. I'll show you sort of roughly how much I use to get the desired color. You really only want maybe like a teaspoon's worth, if that. So that's probably enough. And then what I like to do is I like to throw in just a smidge of the sandstone color here, because it just sort of neutralizes it and brings it back down and doesn't make it look too unnatural. Just throw a little bit more in. Right. So we've roughly got the same consistency of each, same amount of each color. Now we just want to really mix this in. This part here is what takes a while, so I'll speed this part of the video up, and then once I've got it to a consistency I want it, we'll resume it. So just hang around for a sec. We've sort of got that to a color that's pretty consistent with the background, so we'll start painting that on. I've got a few different brushes that I like to use. This is one that's been so it's unused at the moment, so it's just a 25mm. I think it's like a medium bristle, so it's not heaps soft. You want something that's not too soft but not too hard, because the harder it is, the harder the bristle, sorry, the harder it is to get in amongst your cracks. The softer it is, the harder it is to push that tile pointing down into the cracks. So you kind of want like a bit of a balance between the two. This is just from Bunnings. I think they come in a kit of 2 for like $3, and these have been, out of all the brushes I've used, probably the best brush. You can modify them a little bit. Sometimes it's easier if you sort of trim the sides a bit and give it that bit more of an arrow, sort of like a point to your brush. That'll really help get it down in the cracks. If you're covering big backgrounds, this is a 35mm brush. This will be a lot better for doing like the enclosures up there behind me when we start doing some big backgrounds. So keep them in mind. I'll just put them to the side. We've got our tile pointing. You sort of want it at a consistency where if you turn it like that, it's going to sort of run a little bit. It's going to make it easier to get down into the cracks. So I'll pick one that's not probably going to be too hard or going to take too long to show you guys. I'll paint up one and then I'll paint the rest of them, and you don't need to see that part. So just getting bits on your brush like that, just massage it in. You don't have to worry about painting too much just yet. You really just want to get it into the hard to reach places, and then we can go about spreading it after. So just pushing it in there, and you'll see if you've got the right consistency, it'll sort of run a little bit as you turn it, and that's a good thing, because you can sort of just push it around. It just makes it easier to push it around. So what I'll do now is, you can sort of see how we get that on. I'll speed this part of the video up and I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished. So hang around for that. Alright, that's done. That's covered, minus that little dot just there. But yeah, for the most part, that's completely finished. That's kind of the result that you're looking for. If you paste it on nice and thick and you get it right into them cracks now, you probably only need to, a small little like a rock formation like this, you might only get, you sort of might get away with 2 coats. That'll probably come out alright, and then add your like little bits of dry brushing or paint spraying onto it, and you can add some colour and depth and some, make it look a bit exciting. So that's one done. I'll just sit that to the side, keeping in mind that it's it will sort of stick if you don't put something underneath it. So I'm gonna sit that there for the side now, but I'll grab a small bit of the excess foam off cuts from the previous backgrounds and just stick it in under one corner of it just to set it up, get that airflow underneath. I'll paint the rest of these guys and then I'll whack them outside, get them to dry. On a good warm sunny day like today, it'll probably only take an hour before these guys are ready for another coat. It doesn't have to be completely dry, like, you know, rock hard dry, but just dry enough that if you put more pointing on it, it's not just going to scrape off the pre-existing pointing. So I'm going to get stuck into that, finish off them coats, and then I'll show you what they look like when they're done and what we can do once they're finished to add some colour and some shading and that sort of stuff. So hang around. Alrighty guys, we've finished off our little rocks, our rock formations. They're all painted and tile pointing up. There's a few layers on there, so it's all covered. It looks alright. I'll show you the next part. So what I've got here is just a spray bottle. What it has in it is some water and some diluted craft paint. You can buy it at news agencies, Bunnings, Woolworths, all that sort of stuff. It's any sort of paint, as long as it's water based. And yeah, put it into your pump pack, pump it up, and then it's quite literally spray it on. Spray it sort of from the top, and I'll explain why in a second, but spray it on. It's gonna come out really dark, but that's okay, all right? Cover all the angles of it. Lay this down, turn these around. Starting to run out, that's all right. All right, reason for this, not worrying about it being too dark, is the tile pointing and the foam itself actually absorbs up a lot of that black. So by putting on a lot more than what you need to, like I said, you allow the water to naturally run and seep off the rocks as if it would when it's out in the wild, or just out in the bush, etc. All right. You can do one coat of this, or you can do 2, 3, 4, depending on how dark you want to make it. I find by putting a good coat on the first time, it comes out all right. That background that you see inside has probably got, I think it has 3 coats as dark as what this was. So spray it up now, give it 20, 30 minutes. I've got to quickly mow the lawns, so I'll go do that, come back. By that point, it should be ready for another coat of black on there. So you want to spray a good portion of it on like this, give it some time to sit and settle, and then spray it again. If it's too wet, there's no point going over it again and again and again and again. You're not going to achieve anything. You want to allow it to spray and then absorb down into the foam and tile pointing, and then repeat the process. As you can see already, just through the course of me blabbering away about this, it's already lightened up. So repeat that process a few times and it'll create a really natural look, and it just takes the edge off that tile pointing. Instead of having that one like monotone just color all the way through, real boring, you're gonna have depth, shadows, different colors, and it just makes it look natural, the natural sort of staining that the rocks get out in the bush. So give that a go. I'll put a couple more coats on this. I'll go and put them in the enclosure and I'll show you what they look like once they're done. Alrighty guys, that enclosure is all set up now. I'll finish off these rocks. I'll give you a closer look at them in a second. The look I was kind of trying to go for here was that at the base of sort of maybe like a rock formation or a rocky sort of setup, and just slowly, gradually blending into a bit more of a sandy, deserty aspect. So I think I've done alright with that sort of theme that I was going for. There's plenty of places for them to hide. They do have a fully functional sort of nest box over there that will, in the cooler end of the enclosure, that they can use. I do currently have 2 females and a male, so a nice sort of trio here. There is a lot of conflicting information online in regards to keeping them in little colonies and that sort of stuff. I have read a lot of articles and forums and that sort of stuff that state you should probably keep them separate and they might fight and yada yada yada. But look, I believe it's completely dependent on your animals. My guys get along completely fine. They don't fight, and they breed happily. Both females produced 2 clutches this year, which I'll show you in a second. And really, I've got no complaints. So my guys can do it. I know a lot of other people there keep them in the colonies. They don't have any issues. I think it's really just dependent on your animals. If you watch your animals, keep a close eye on your animals, keep the food up to your animals, you shouldn't have any issues. So what I'd like to do is I'll quickly show you my guys and then we'll chuck them in and I'll show you some babies. So what I've got first for you guys, I just want to show you the variations in 1 in size, but 2 in colour as well. So we'll start with this female here. This is one of my females. She's not the most fond of being handled. Just blow some of that sand off her. She's not the most fond of being handled, but they're not exactly an aggressive gecko either. They won't latch on to you or anything like that. But this is one of my girls just here. Ooh, I don't really want her to drop and fall, but it's kind of difficult to sort of hold and show you guys the colour. And so she's kind of a real dull brown with a black banding, typical black banding. Cinctus, generally speaking, have a black collar here, whereas Wheeleri just sort of got big black blotches and that sort of stuff. Beautiful big tail. She's really fat, really healthy. This is where they store a lot of their fat. But you can see she's kind of an off colour. Yeah, it's a bit hard to explain really. It's a bit of a dull brown with the black banding. But nonetheless, she's got beautiful eyes, beautiful gecko, and quite a large gecko. So we'll whack her in there and she can get to searching around and checking out her cool new little environment. What I'll show you, I'll just get out 2 at the same time here. Oh, this one's not too happy about being handled, but anyway. So female on the left, male on the right. You can see the difference just in colour and size too, for that matter. This is a 3-year-old male and a 4-year-old female. He's very reddy pink, quite a nice appealing sort of colour. A bit nice to look at. Oh, calm down. And she's that dull sort of colour again. So there's that variation. He's a very nice looking animal. Very fat, very healthy animal. Very easy to care for. Never misses a feed. Oh, relax, bud. I'll put him back before I drop him. And then here's my big cranky female. So she's quite a nice female again. This girl here produced 2 clutches this year. First clutch was completely infertile, unfortunately. And second clutch, she only produced 1 good egg. So the year before, she produced 2 clutches and both were fertile. Unfortunately, due to a incubator mishap on my behalf, they didn't make it. So again, very healthy animal, very easy to keep. And in my opinion, they're super rewarding. Great starter gecko. You really can't go wrong with them. So beautiful gecko. I'll whack her in before she decides to jump off as well. And we'll try and get some nice footage of these guys in the habitat here and them hunting around and that sort of stuff. So I'll give them a good feed tonight, and hopefully we can sort of capture that a bit, throw the moonlight on them and see how they look. So really impressed with this setup. I like how it looks at the moment. I feel like it's missing something, but I guess I'll keep sort of searching around and trying to work out what it is that it's missing. But for now, I'm super happy with it. I'll show you these babies in a second. I'll have to cut the clip and get them out of the incubator and whatnot, and then yeah, we'll move on to the outro and just talk about what we're going to do in the next episode. So give me 1 sec to show you that. Alright guys, so like I said, I was going to show you them 2 little babies that I produced. Oh, actually 3 baby wheeleries that I produced this year from these guys here. 2 of these guys have a different parent to a different dad to the other one, and you'll be able to see the variation and why in the reptile hobby, why some people do that selective breeding, that line breeding, in order to produce the animals that they want. So you want a darker individual animal, primarily speaking, you'll put two darker animals, mum and dad, together to produce darker babies. You want lighter babies, you put two lighter parents together, and so forth. So I'll show you the first little guy that I hatched out this year. This guy here is, don't know how well you can see him, but that is little baby Wilbur. So he comes from the dad in the video that you just saw. I'm going to get him out of there before I go ahead and pour all that perlite on him. But he's a very quick little individual, so I have to be really careful. And he does not like to be held. That's Wilbur. So he's a very pink little individual, very healthy, gorgeous little animal, great patterning, and just compared to my finger, he is one tiny, tiny, cute little gecko. So very pink. I don't know how well you guys can see that, but I don't want to let him go. I don't want to drop him. But yeah, gorgeous little critter. Absolutely in love with him. Definitely keeping him. He was the first Wheeleri that I ever produced, so I have a bit of a connection to him. I really quite like him. So moving on to the next ones. These guys only hatched this morning, so they're very quite fresh. And surprisingly a lot bigger than Wilbur just here, but they have just hatched. They're just as healthy, but very dark individuals. So little Wilbur's got all white arms, or like all that pinky creamy colored arms. These guys are all black, jet black eyes, sort of hooded black head, black tails, and very strong patterning. Gorgeous little, like, oh, I can't get enough of them. I think they're gorgeous, and compared to little Wilbur, the difference between the two of them is phenomenal. I just, yeah, super stoked with them. I'll be keeping these guys as well. I'll be keeping a lot of the geckos that I produce, and then just trading them between friends and that sort of stuff. And yeah, I don't breed to make money off these animals. I've been operating at a loss with reptiles for the past, I've been keeping reptiles for 20 years now this year, and I've never made any money back on it unless I've traded animals or sold animals and that sort of stuff. But I don't breed animals to sell or anything like that. I just do it for the love of it. So he's a cute little lizard. I'll just pop him back and I'll show you his little sibling or brother or sister, whatever it is. Slightly different patterning and slightly smaller again. Not quite as big as his brother. You just got to be real delicate because these guys have only just hatched. They're still very flighty, but this is a new one. So not quite as black arms as his brother or sister. A little bit of a mix of the pink and the black there, but a lot less banding and colouring. So these two were produced from a dad that I don't currently keep anymore. I gave it to a good mate of mine that keeps and breeds Anteraceae pythons, and he's a weapon at that. So he's now taken the plunge, I think, into geckos, and it's going to be a slippery slope for him, I think. But these guys were produced from him. Very cute little critters. I'm super stoked. I love them. You really can't get much cuter than that. I mean, just look at the size of them compared to my hand. And I don't necessarily have huge hands, but these guys are definitely a lot smaller than the average gecko. So stoked with that, and I can't wait to continue breeding them. I'll just pop them back. But yeah, that's the babies from what I've produced this year. I've got 2 more eggs in the incubator that are due to hatch any day now. So I'm really stoked to see them 2 that are in the incubator now come from the same parents as little Wilbur. The one on the left here, the pink one of the ones that I just showed you. So it'll be awesome to see what kind of variation they'll come out as, and yeah, and size and that sort of stuff. So that's it for the episode today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was a little bit more informative. I'm going to try and be just as informative in the next episode and the next backgrounds all the way through. I think it'll be a little bit easier with these big backgrounds and these big enclosures behind me, as there's a lot more room, and I'll probably end up doing the backgrounds whilst they're in the enclosure rather than taking them out and doing them outside, just due to the size and that sort of stuff. I feel like it might be a bit easier to do it in that enclosure. So I'll show you guys how I do that in the enclosure and how I form them up and get them ready. So I did get some tristis monitors or black-headed monitors on the Pilbara locality, so roughly from the same region as these geckos, but just obviously these guys are an arboreal species. So I'm really excited to whip up a background for them. At the moment, they're just up in one of these big enclosures here doing their own thing. So I got some 2 gecko tanks here that I'd like to do first. and then we'll get to starting on the big ones there. But in the next episode, we'll get this Aki monitor enclosure. I want to get him out of that tub there, so we'll get to doing that enclosure for him. He's still quite small, so he doesn't need a huge enclosure as of yet. Putting him into really big enclosures, especially with monitors, you might find that they're a little bit skittish and you mightn't see them as much. So by putting him in a bit of a smaller enclosure, giving him the right temperatures, keeping up to keeping the food up to him and that sort of stuff, I'm hoping that we'll see lots of him, and he'll be a bit of a cool little feature animal for upcoming episodes, as he's quite good on the tongue feeding and he's not too scared of me. So that'll be awesome. So hang around for that. Like I said, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was a little bit more informative. I'm still working out the whole filming and the camera angles and lighting and that sort of stuff, but this is not my first and only job. I do have a life outside of this sort of stuff, so this is just something I do on the side. So I'm doing the best I can. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for episode 4. Thanks, guys.